Hello, and welcome to this video on the scientific and philosophical developments of the 1800s. We're going to look at how science, religion, philosophy grew in this period, changed in this period, and what new fields kind of popped up in this period that really, um, changed the way Europeans look at things. One thing to note is that in this period, we kind of see this turn of the century period from the late 1800s into the early 1900s called the fin du siècle, or the Belle Époque. This simply refers to, again, the period between the 18 and 1900s when we kind of see a new century, one century and the other century begin. It was a very interesting time in European history and culture. Things were changing at a rapid pace. The things that people had kind of assumed to be true for centuries, for generations, were being challenged, such as religion, such as certain scientific beliefs and philosophical beliefs. And we see like kind of a backlash of sorts against like these once dominant fields, and we'll talk about them in several examples. But when you see this period, just know, this kind of is going to kind of grow into a trend in which things become more and more uncertain, and we're going to see a decay in knowledge and many levels of higher thought and thinking. It's going to eventually lead to, you could argue, like an unraveling in many of these areas. We'll look at some of those examples as well over this unit and the next and the next. So let's see what was this period all about. What kind of inspired some of the changes we're going to see over the next couple decades and beyond. All right. So first field we're going to look at is evolution and Darwinism, and then social Darwinism. You probably learned about Darwin before. What you learned in science classes much more detailed than what I'm going to go through here, but just in case you didn't, Charles Darwin, scientist of the 1800s, super important to scientific thought in the 1800s. Darwin wrote about theories concerning evolution and survival of the fittest and natural selection. According to Darwin's writings and works, looking at a variety of organisms, primarily finches, first, but then other animals as well. Animals evolved through a process called natural selection, where the animals that have the best genes to survive in an environment, whether it's the color of their fur or their certain abilities that they're born with, those animals that have those genes are best able to survive in their environment. Whereas those that do not have the best genes eventually will die out. They will not produce offspring and then therefore reproduce, and the animals with the best genes will reproduce and survive. This is known as survival of the fittest. And together, this process of the animals reproducing and pushing on their superior genes, generation after generation, is what eventually leads us to evolution. Darwin came up with this theory. It changed Europeans. Europeans view him as a highly controversial figure, but over time he is accepted. He even goes on to point out that he believes that man is an animal and therefore victim to this process. He is not, however, someone we would call a social Darwinist. Those people, come after him. People such as Herbert Spencer being the major social Darwinist you should know. People took Darwin's theories in regards to animals and science and didn't just apply them to humans, which, you can argue that that's true. Humans did go through a process of evolution and natural selection. But he said that today, if you look at society today, the humans that have a worse experience, living in poverty, living in destitution and things like that, those humans are those humans that live in those situations have inferior genes, while those humans that are rich, powerful, have better lives, members of the bourgeoisie and above, they have superior genes. And he applied this to races, and it was also applied to classes and things like that eventually as well. So social Darwinism emerges quite quickly after Darwin's theories, and it becomes just an incredibly dominant force. It goes and develops. It becomes attached to racism that has been around in Europe for centuries beyond. Saying that people outside of Europe that are being dominated by Europeans have inferior genes. That was a belief which we'll talk about. You then have Volkisch thought develop in Germany and areas around Germany, saying that Germans, because of their superior status in Europe, have superior genes, and therefore they must band together to save Germany and Western civilization from inferior races. This continues and grows into eugenics movements, scientific racism, which was not scientific at all, it was made up science. But you see this develop, supporting policies in governments such as Nazi Germany and America, saying that different minorities should be exterminated or sterilized in order to save the country, Germany, America, whatever. This leads to racial laws against racialized laws against Jews in Germany and beyond. In Europe, as Nazis kind of gain power, but also in America, you see Jim Crow laws based on this idea as well. So incredibly influential, dominant theory that does change things. Darwin did use science and at least develop a theory that has not been, largely changed over the years. It's still relatively accurate for the most part. That's why he's still really important to learn about. Herbert Spencer, though, none of his social Darwinist theories have stood the test of time. There's other factors we know that kind of impacts people and makes people who they are, and it's not just your genes that kind of determine what kind of person you are, right? It's your environment as well, which often gets overlooked. All right, another change in this period, healthcare and sanitation. Like I've been saying, in this period of industrialization, we're seeing, people not really know what's causing some illness in cities. Cities at this time, up until the 1850s, 1860s, are pretty dirty, cramped, overcrowded, full of disease and waste and things like that. That does begin to change during the Second Industrial Revolution, which begins, sometime between 1850 and 1870. So we're seeing this shift happen, and people are beginning to realize that germs from water, germs from a bad environment, those are things that are making situations and things dirty. So one person you should know is Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur, he was a scientist that kind of developed the theory of germs, the germ theory, saying that the things that get us sick are actually microscopic bacteria and things like that, and we need to go through a process of cleaning things we eat or consume or use to wash ourselves. And one of his main contributions was the process of pasteurization. So pasteurization, and you should know what pasteurization is. It's a process in which you can apply high temperature to milk or things like that, and heat it to a high temperature, kill all the germs. You do see a trend against this in recent years. People are going and buying unpasteurized milk, which highly caution against that. It's going to lead. It can lead to you getting sick if you drink unpasteurized milk. So be very careful with that. As I told you previously, hospitals, very dirty, dangerous places in this time, mostly because if you go in with an infection or something or a wound or something like that, you'll go into this place full of germs because there's no sanitation practices, germs everywhere. That changes again in this period. Slowly over time, we see sanitation processes begin and disinfection processes begin, led by people like Joseph Lister. He gets his name kind of goes to the product Listerine, if you're familiar with that. Listerine is supposed to kill the germs in your mouth. Joseph Lister began to reuse processes of sanitation in hospitals and in operating areas to again kill germs that could infect your wound as you're getting sick, or if you're getting surgery or something like that. We do see public health measures grow, and again, the knowledge around germs and germ theory and sanitation, it grows and grows over the years. We do see governments begin to make changes that try to clean up cities. I taught you about the Great Stink. We see some scientists like Michael Faraday kind of call attention to that. He helped create and come up with the ideas that led to things like electromagnetic generation and things like that. He also took a stance and did not support his government as they participated in the Crimean War. He did not support the British government and refused to help produce weapons for that war. But he also kind of tried to call attention to the Great Stink and saying, we can't have this dirty, rotten river running through our city because it's full of germs. Germs lead to illnesses and disease. We must change this. So you see people calling attention to this, and it's slowly changing over time. Again, we do see growth in the traditional scientific areas, and this leads to an idea called positivism. Positivism is a common theme among more traditional scientists of the 1800s that said we can make positive changes by working in a scientific, methodical way. And the different scientific fields, especially new ones, those are slowly kind of working together to make things better. It's not going to be an immediate overnight change, like a French Revolution might be, but it's going to be a slow, steady march toward progress and a better future. They're not trying to change the world overnight, but they're trying to slowly just, improve sanitation, improve the way medical procedures work, improve knowledge around germs so that, better policies can be made by governments. That slow, steady march towards progress is kind of a hallmark of the positivists in this period. That kind of contrasts with the physics of this period. Since the scientific revolution, I must emphasize that science and this world has been led by Isaac Newton. He's been pretty dominant since the 1600s in the world of physics. That begins to change with these scientists. Last slide, I glossed over him, but you have Dmitry Mendeleev, who kind of classified all of the different elements on the periodic table, giving them different atomic weights and things like that. That process is going to continue, but change dramatically. Dmitry was just doing normal science there. These guys are kind of doing something a little bit different. They're going to kind of dismantle and challenge Isaac Newton, who again has been pretty dominant for many years and has really pretty much been unchallenged until this point in time. Newton's big idea was the Newtonian world machine, that according to his theories around physics, every single thing in the universe followed the exact same set of mathematical principles. These scientists begin to change that. First up, we have the Curies. They begin to look at these different elements and things like that. They discover the element radium that gives off radiation, and you probably know what happens to them. They were kind of infected with radiation poisoning and sickness from their work around these elements, giving us the term radioactivity. They eventually get sick with cancer and pass away. But their big discovery is that these atoms that are shooting off these electrons, I believe it's electrons, don't quote me, I'm not a scientist, that are kind of causing radioactive situations, they're coming from an atom that is not a solid body. There are small worlds that have orbiting particles, subatomic particles, that can then jump off and impact you if the element happens to be radioactive. This, again, was not one of Newton's theories. He didn't know too much about this, to be honest, but this is kind of the world we're getting into, this subatomic, uncertain world that's kind of challenging a bunch of things. That takes us to Max Planck, who kind of worked further on these subatomic particles. He said that these subatomic particles are emitted or shot out in uneven spurts called quanta, and that that's the term for that. He also said that matter and energy actually may be different forms of the same thing. So again, going back to Newton, he said matter and energy are related, but they're not the same thing. Now we have scientists kind of challenging that idea. Eventually, we get to Albert Einstein at the turn of the century with his theory of relativity, saying with his famous equation that matter is a form of energy, that E equals mc squared. Is also making some bold statements such as space and time not being absolute, that they are relative to the observer, and they're connected to a space-time continuum, meaning that different people in different situations observe space and time in different ways because of different perspectives and things like that. So again, the big thing you didn't know, because again, I'm not a scientist, I don't do the best job of explaining their theories, but these scientists are challenging the norms of the day. Compared to these scientists that kind of are doing traditional, steady, progressive scientist work and kind of pushing science forward in a slow, methodical way, these guys are making bold statements and challenging norms that have been accepted for 100 plus years in the world of science. They add to an element of uncertainty and challenge the norms of the day, making people kind of double think and question the world around them. And this questioning is going to grow and grow and grow and grow over the next couple decades. And today, there's discoveries like this made all the time. They're at a much smaller scale, but it's not uncommon to look at news in the scientific world and just see like a new development that, you know, puts forward a new theory that scientists believe is now happening. You know, that process kind of started with these guys. If you'd like to know more about quantum mechanics in this world, I have a video linked here in the slide you can watch. It's pretty short, but it explains these theories in a basic sense, if you're like me and don't really understand them too well. All right. And then you can see a cartoon here of a Swedish cartoonist kind of predicting the future and in the terms of, you know, atomic scientists and what could happen if atomic science goes in the wrong direction. This was made in 1920, you know, 25 plus years before the use of atomic weapons. Philosophy also kind of goes in this direction. The last big philosophical movement, of course, was the Enlightenment that, you know, was put forward and promoted by the bourgeoisie, led to the liberal revolutions of the late 17 and early 1800s. Now we have philosophers kind of challenging that norm. The big guy being Friedrich Nietzsche. He was a very big critic of this bourgeois society that was developed in Europe in the 1800s, again because of the Enlightenment and movements associated with that. He's saying that, you know, there's too much going on. The bourgeoisie have made society too decadent, too lazy, and there's no creativity, no passion in the world. He also criticized Christianity and saying that, you know, these organized religions have destroyed human impulse and passion. And the reason that the things that really people should really focus on are these forces that steer human behavior. You must kind of throw out all of this bourgeois decadent society out the window, traditional things out the window, and accept a few truths through what he called nihilism. How do you become nihilistic? You must recognize that God is dead. There's no such need for God. And then after you kind of throw out bourgeois society and religion, you should accept, you should look for someone called an Übermensch or Superman, someone that can come into society and lead society to a more perfect situation. One person leading society and kind of creating this society that, you know, it rejects all these old opinions and beliefs of Europe of the past, including democracy, social reform, and suffrage, and kind of guide society to his will, to his whim. Because these forces that exist are just corrupting people and making people lazy and not really putting forward or pushing humanity forward. That's what the Uberman should be for, to kind of push society forward and take to humanity to its next stage of existence. Which, you know, I'm not a big Nietzsche reader, but he isn't really. I don't know if he explains what that is. He dies young. He doesn't really become very popular while he's alive. His sister, though, takes his work and kind of ties it into nationalism. Nationalism is a growing field in this period, of course, as we have talked about. Lots of people are becoming nationalists, and you're seeing the rise of social Darwinism now as well. So we're seeing people kind of tie Nietzsche to these nationalist ideas and these, social Darwinist theories, and eventually we kind of see Nietzsche kind of align with with anti-Semitism, which is a big growing trend in this period as well. So while Nietzsche was alive, he was mostly known for his nihilism, you know, again, kind of destroying the progress that the Enlightenment has made over the past, 100 plus years, and that we just need to kind of have one person lead us to success, to destiny. He then gets tied to these ideas of nationalism because of his sister and other people around her that were kind of making these changes. You can probably guess, he was pretty influential to some of the Nazis because they kind of pick up on his ideas. And you can kind of see this personified in someone like Adolf Hitler, who, believed he was the one person that could lead society to its next plane of existence. So, influential after his death, but, he's kind of just associated today with being affiliated with, right-wing extremists and the Nazi government. But again, he's challenging these norms and themes that have been around forever, challenging these theories and making people rethink the things they accepted for so long. Other philosophers you might want to know: Georges Sorel, French theorist on socialism. He again supports the idea of destroying capitalism, this thing that is destroying society, destroying the working class, and he advocates for something called the general strike. General strike is when all unions, all workers kind of band together as one and stop working to kind of bring down the bourgeoisie, bring down the owners of capital, and to kind of reform society in a more positive direction. You do see unions today. Some people in unions kind of call for this here and there when they want to make big political statements, but we don't see it really used too much in the modern world. Henri Bergson, another French thinker, saying that science is good and all, but the only thing that you can really depend on is what you see with your own eyes, with your own experiences, because they're kind of in this empirical field. He's saying you must focus on what you can actually see and with your own eyes and experience in your own situation. If you read about something, it doesn't really matter. Even if it's done in a scientific, honest method, that doesn't count. You really need to go and experience things with your own eyes and your own situation. Just reading a description and analyzing something from a distance is not worthwhile. So again, scientists are philosophers, I should say, are kind of changing the way they view the world and making it more based around what they feel and what they think is going on. Not this really like rational, solid analysis we saw from the Enlightenment, where they're using rational thinking and reasoning and things like that. It's got to be based around just what they think again, kind of going back and turning their back to the scientific revolution. All right. Psychology, a new field in this world, starts off kind of in a philosophical sense, what people kind of looked at. Then it kind of enters the medical/scientific world and grows today, where psychology is a sound part of the scientific world. We see psychology kind of start to appear in the late 1800s, and then thanks to Sigmund Freud, it kind of grows and grows and grows. And then by World War I, it's seen as a solid medical treatment. So let's kind of look at that. Sigmund Freud is the big scientist here. He is the one most responsible for popularizing psychology as a science. He had predecessors and people that came before him, such as Wilhelm Wundt, that really did work to make psychology a science. But Sigmund Freud's writings and his work really did bring psychology to the next level. His big psychological field was something known as psychoanalysis. Basically, psychoanalysis, which still exists today in the world of psychology, basically states that humans are driven by these unconscious forces. And if you look at this iceberg over here, the conscious mind is above the ocean, the unconscious mind is below the ocean. That anything we can think of in the world around us, 15% of our brain is accessible at any time. You can think about what you want to do, what you're doing, what you have done, knowledge, facts, information that you have. But within our brain, there lies a big untapped portion of our brain called the unconscious. And in this unconscious mind, we have secret desires, sexual urges, unwanted behaviors that we might want to act out. Those things exist in our brain that we just can't really touch or experience. They do seep out here and there when you lash out at someone, when you have a dream, a strange dream perhaps, when you have these things called Freudian slips, which you may know of those. Those are when you say something you maybe you shouldn't have said, or maybe that you were maybe thinking or not thinking, that kind of just was blurted out. Freud said that when we have those experiences, that's our unconscious mind seeping out. And the unconscious mind, because it's so large and untapped, it really does shape a lot of our behavior. He treated and worked with rich white Austrian women who would lose feelings in their arm or lose movement in their arm or something like that, and he would ask them about what's going on, and they would say they had dreams that maybe they shouldn't have had, or they had experiences they shouldn't have had. And he's saying, well, you're not really able to move your arm because of these unconscious desires and things that you may have, or of these unconscious fears that you're not really recognizing. So Freud, as a psychologist, was super impactful over the years. People really flocked to his writings and his beliefs. Again, because he's kind of challenging the medical and scientific norms of the day. He's saying you can't really know what's going on. Just like the philosophers said, we don't really have to trust these old rational types of thinking. Just like some of the scientists said, the Newtonian world is gone. Freud is also saying the same thing, that we can't really know what's in our brains. There's 80% of our brain that is untouchable, and we can't tap into it. Therefore, that's really what we have to kind of look at and figure out how that unconscious mind is kind of affecting our behavior and our beliefs. He grows and grows and grows. Freud does is an importance over the years. Eventually, after World War I, when you have shell-shocked veterans returning home from World War I, and seeking some sort of treatment with what we would call today PTSD and things like that, Freud's theories and treatment advice really skyrockets and becomes incredibly important. And people realize, they don't realize that men experiencing that amount of violence and chaos and destruction can cause mental disorder, but they do kind of begin to see that Freud was right, that there's some things that you just can't see on the human experience or on a human's face or body. Just because you can't see injuries there or the person can't feel pain, that doesn't mean they're not experiencing mental pain or mental anguish. And again, people of that period would kind of say that's coming from the unconscious mind or something like that. Later psychologists such as Carl Jung kind of build upon Freud's ideas. You don't have to know Carl Jung too much, but he did come up with some interesting ideas, such as the collective unconscious, that all humans share similar memories and ancestry, which is why when you look at creation myths from different early civilizations, they're all kind of similar or have similar stories. There's also the archetypes that exist in those stories, which is why, again, when you go around the world, you can kind of see different archetypes exist in traditional myths and stories, such as the hero, the villain, the scoundrel, the damsel in distress of sorts. Those kind of trends exist across cultures and societies, and Carl Jung would say that comes from the theory of archetypes. So again, psychology, today it's very scientific, very much based on evidence and research and experimentation. But back then it was, Freud is saying that, the world exists the way it does, or the human thought exists the way it does because there's a large untapped portion of the mind that is untouchable, unknowable, except through dreams and a few other experiences like that, or through Freudian therapy, psychoanalysis. And therefore that, a lot of human behavior really can be measured or traced. That's why we see lots of unpredictable things happen. And just because someone doesn't appear to be wounded or having trauma doesn't mean that there isn't trauma going on up in that mind. Video there you might want to watch on Sigmund Freud that kind of challenges a lot of his theories, because today they are mostly unaccepted. Last slide is a look at Christianity. Since, you could argue the Reformation, the scientific revolution, you could argue since then Europe has becoming less and less and less religious, and that trend continues into this period. Whether we're in Protestant Europe or Catholic Europe, Europeans by far are still mostly religious, but that is slowly spiraling out of control. Things that have helped since the scientific revolution: you have the Enlightenment, you have industrialization, modernization, urbanization, and migration. These things have destroyed those close-knit, tight-knit rural communities that really relied upon religion to grow and prosper. Now with those rural communities being replaced with industrial cities, that's not becoming the trend anymore. So we're seeing, again, religion kind of fade away. The church is no longer the center of human life. Interesting story that, the bourgeoisie of Europe, particularly France, they noticed this trend. They were still very religious and moralistic. They noticed that workers, the proletariat of France and Europe in general, are not as religious as them. Part of that was the workers are working all the time. They don't have as much time to go to church because they need Sundays to rest from working, 6 days a week. But the bourgeoisie said, these people are in their bad conditions, their bad situations because they're not going to church. They're poor because they're not really, going to church and doing the right thing, adding some social Darwinism into that critique as well. So you do start to see this trend of the bourgeoisie and the leaders of Europe try to push and build churches in these poor neighborhoods to kind of send a message to the poor that, if you go to church, your life will get better, which, there's no relationship to that. It's just kind of a lie to make themselves feel better. But you do see this trend of anti-clericalism grow. This, again, has been growing for generations in Europe since, scientific revolution, Enlightenment, French Revolution, but it just kind of rises up again in this period. As nations become more liberal, more industrialized, less communal, less rural, we see anti-clericalism grow as a reaction to this response of building more churches or trying to reemphasize Christianity. And it kind of backfires across Europe. Again, you kind of see governments mostly just begin to step away from supporting the building of churches. So after initial push of trying to build these churches and make the workers more religious, they kind of just give up. The French government, for example, ends religious control of education, and they enact laws that separate the institution of church and state by 1905. Now, that was also fueled by the anti-Semitic Dreyfus Affair, which we'll talk about soon. But you kind of, again, see this trend kind of continue across Europe. Darwin's theories help with this, and, philosophers and writers also kind of help with this as well. The church's response to this, continuing shift away from them was to more or less not change the boat too much. You do see some popes kind of call out some of these institutions that are, making attacks against religion. Pope Pius IX wrote, that we should get rid of progressive policies and liberalism and modern civilization and any other ism that we've talked about that wasn't conservatism. But that didn't really resonate. No one really cared about that, though. You do see some popes try to promote the lives of the worker and promote socialism and attack capitalism, but again, no big changes there. There really just is this, again, the shift is continuing against the church as governments become more liberal. Workers, don't have as much time to kind of go to churches, and there's the destruction of the European rural community. These things all kind of contribute to this loss and support of the church in Europe. And you're even seeing like examples of art made criticizing the policies of the church. People were criticizing the Catholic Church, for example, in this painting, showing an older clergy member kind of lustfully gazing upon this young choir boy here. So you're seeing artists kind of pick up on this trend and kind of, again, criticize the church in new lights, calling them, certain names and things that they wouldn't have called them before. So again, church and religion is going to become less and less important, and the church really is going to respond to it too much. All right, that is it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.